I'm Noelle McCarthy and I'm here this afternoon with Ann Dowsett Johnston, award-winning Canadian journalist and author of Drink, the intimate relationship between women and alcohol. Good afternoon, Ann.
Hi, Noelle.
So to begin with, what makes women's drinking different from men's?
Well, the research would tell us that women and men drink very differently. Men drink to be social, and this can happen in teenage years, adolescence. They drink to enjoy themselves, their pals. When they progress in drinking problems, men tend to go to the bar, sports bar, hang out, maybe with different friends than they did before, but certainly hang out with others. Women isolate. Women tend to isolate and drink alone, and certainly that was my pattern. They drink to self-medicate anxiety and depression, and they're much more likely to suffer from depression, 40% more likely. And this tends to be their way of having an alcohol problem, and therefore it can be, as mine was, very, very hidden, very isolating, and very lonely.
In terms of getting it right, is culture, where do culture and policy meet, do you think? You know, in your book you've talked about the need for there to be a sufficient amount of public pressure on politicians before you get a political solution.
Right.
So that need for goodwill or the will to change.
Right. Well, I think the major thing really is to have a public dialogue about alcohol, because I think, and I see this over and over again, no matter where I am, that there is such a terrible unwillingness to talk about anything negative about alcohol, that we're not having a discussion at all. And I'm not saying, as I say in the book, I'm not saying that alcohol is the new tobacco. The alcohol industry is behaving like the tobacco industry. It's really targeting women. And I believe that it targets everybody. And I think that it's such a powerful multinational force, and it lobbies hard. And we're not even beginning to push back. Or to have an adult conversation about it. So, 15% of breast cancer cases being related to alcohol, that's just something that most women don't know. And if they do hear it, they shake their heads and don't believe you. So I think that we deserve to be educated on it. I mean, it's absolutely acting like dinosaurs, or ostriches to just hide our heads and say we don't want to know.
It is impossible or hard to have this conversation without referring to historical context, though, isn't it? And
right.
A conversation about alcohol will or has always been framed in moral terms.
Right, right. And so frequently when people hear me talk, this happened yesterday at the Canadian High Commission, people just presume that I'm prohibitionist, which couldn't be farther from the truth. I'm a recovering alcoholic, but I am not. And I'm sober, but I'm not. I had a lot of fun with alcohol, and I presume others have a lot of fun with it, and so they should. If they can enjoy it safely, why not? So I have no trouble with that whatsoever. I just think that there are health implications that we're not talking about, and certainly health implications for women, that we just should, if we're aware of what, the problems with trans fats, we should be aware of low-risk drinking guidelines and know what's safe for us. And it just seems to me that we don't have any sense of, our intelligence isn't informed at all by what's safe on the dial. The dial's completely blind, is totally not marked for us. I mean, if you say to women, it's 10 drinks a week, they shake their heads. I had an email from a friend last night who said, I quoted from your book, and someone said, well, if that's the definition of binge drinking, then they better redefine what binge drinking is, because I don't go for that. And it's not a matter of not going for it, it's just what's safe. We just democratically we're equal, and hormonally and metabolically we're not.
Is that what makes women's drinking different, as you see it?
Yeah, I don't think it's a moral issue. For me, it's not moral at all. In fact, I would argue the opposite, that it's my right to drink if I'm able to drink, and I should be able to drink. I think what we maybe it's a baby boom thing, and when I was born, but I just believe that we should be well educated on what's healthy. And in terms of hormonally and metabolically, we are just not built to drink the same way. And we, men and women both suffer the cognitive deficits and the strokes and the carcinogenic effects of alcohol, but we just suffer them earlier, and we suffer them with less exposure to alcohol. We become addicted much faster, and we die earlier.
Do we drink for different reasons?
Yeah, we drink for different reasons. I mean, that's the understanding.
That's
in
what
all
the
the
research
research,
says.
the research says that we do. I can say that I can sit in a room of sober alcoholics, and the man next to me will say to me, I also drank because I was abused as a young boy. So sure, men and women both, when they're in trouble with alcohol, can self-medicate with alcohol. It's a good way to numb. But I do think that classically women drink in an isolated fashion. We drink to self-medicate. The understanding is that men drink to be with their pals. They may have a new set of pals at the bar, but they drink to be with their pals. That's the sort of collective wisdom. I think that women are drinking now for some very interesting reasons. And my book says, and I believe it strongly, that it's become the modern woman's steroid.
Yes.
And that's why we drink. I think it enables us to do the heavy lifting. Certainly it was my pattern for years. Go home after a hard day at the office, chop vegetables, drink, maybe only a glass of wine, maybe another glass of wine with dinner. For years, that's all I drank. Mm. And then there was the issue of self-medication for depression. And we are 40% more likely to suffer from depression than men. And I think that a lot of women I know self-medicate with alcohol, so be it stress, often stress, anxiety, depression, of course. And the number one reason that women get into trouble with alcohol is childhood sexual abuse. That's your number one predictor of whether you're going to have trouble. So more than genes. So I find that fascinating. So I think that it's very complex.
It's you raise an interesting point in your book when you talk about your own depression and self-medicating, because you say that there is some regret for you personally around the fact that you didn't go to a doctor. And you raise that as another possible destiny, that you could perhaps have gone on an antidepressant even episodically.
Right. I could have gone for help. Had my mother's story of alcoholism not been so intertwined with Valium and the use of Valium, it made me very pill phobic. And way earlier I should have been on antidepressants. I clearly have a significant problem with depression and have since I was 17, and it really was a little inhumane what I put myself through. But I think that I didn't, and I did use alcohol. And it was a longer journey than it should have been, a much longer journey.
There's another question, isn't there? Because if alcohol is the modern woman's steroid, that does beg the question, why is there so much heavy lifting? Right. I don't know if we can answer that.
Right, and I think there's so much heavy lifting because we're in the middle of a really interesting socioeconomic revolution, and we're only, where are we, halfway there? 3/4 of the way there, who knows where we are, but we aren't where we need to be for women. And women have absorbed a sense that we have to be perfect at home, as stay-at-home moms trying to be. We have to be perfect like our fathers at work, and we have to be perfectly thin, and we have to be perfect at everything we do, and it's punitive. Mm-hmm. It's very punitive, and I think that the greatest gift of getting older for me has been a sense that it's enough, and to learn, if not to say no, to say not now. I'll get to that, but not now, in terms of just life, in terms of knowing when my limits are there. And one of the greatest things of recovery is that you learn that you have to Say no to certain things. You learn that self-care and balance are absolutely key, or you will rock yourself off balance and could possibly drink again. And you have to learn, as we say, halt, hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. You have to be very alert about those triggers. And it teaches you self-care. So my self-care matters to me now. I'm much more cognizant of my own balance, needs, etc. And that includes taking care of my depression as well as my sobriety. And so I've never been happier, touch wood. I've never been more Ann. I'm just, sobriety has brought me to a very interesting place. Maybe at 60 I would have gotten there anyway. But I'm a very peaceful, sober person.
And that's your personal story and your personal journey, but this sort of bigger, wider, historical, socio-economic moment that you're talking about, this is not a moment that has been lost on marketing companies, on people who sell alcohol to women. That intersection of pressure and pressure relief has been lucrative, has also been taken up by women, hasn't it, when it comes to drinking?
Yes, the market got very pretty and squishy and sweet.
Pink.
And very pink, and very, very pink. And some of the names are worth mentioning, like Mummy's Time Out wine,
Mommy
Juice,
Tell us,
Happy Bitch.
Is Mommy Juice a real thing?
Mommy Juice is a real thing. Mommy Juice is a real thing. Girls' Night Out, French Rabbit, Cupcake Wine. I mean, these are not manly drinks.
What's Happy Bitch?
Happy Bitch is a wine, a wine sold in America. I don't think it's in Canada yet. And so the market is tilted very pink. It's like Virginia Slims in a bottle. Very, very tilted at female drinkers, and so cleverly with alcopops, pitched young, pitched early, steering young girls in high school, because of course that's the initiation often of drinking, not the escalation, which is universities. So heading them, chick beer, steering them towards drinking distilled spirits. And so when you hit campuses, you have young men and women playing drinking games. He's drinking beer, she's drinking vodka or tequila. She's 2/3 his size. She probably hasn't eaten because she's on a date. And we all know that alcohol is the #1 date rape drug. So it's a complex reality. She graduates from university, and she doesn't slow down as another generation did. She doesn't slow down, and she continues to drink vodka, maybe better vodka than the vodka she did in university. And so that age group between 24 and 36, which is the age group that gives birth to 60% of babies, roughly, is not slowing down. In fact, they're the steepest incline in terms of risky drinking increase. So this isn't good. This doesn't spell anything healthy. Not for babies, not for women heading into motherhood. And I'm not being preachy, I'm just saying she doesn't slow down then, and then she doesn't slow down in her 40s and 50s. She drinks differently in her 40s and 50s right now, if she's a woman. She drinks daily, maybe a little less if she's in her 40s and 50s, but it's a daily habit. Whereas younger people are sort of the weekend warriors, drink to blackout on the weekend, and it's a different pattern. But women are keeping that feminized alcohol industry very healthy, very, very healthy.
How acceptable is it to be drunk in public in Canada now, whether you're a man or a woman?
It's not. It's not acceptable there, but in other places I've traveled, it is acceptable. It is acceptable much more so in the UK than it is in North America. In North America, we're very critical if you're publicly drunk.
So when you're talking about the UK, are you talking about that so-called ladette culture?
Absolutely, absolutely I am. And the enthusiasm around groups of women celebrating publicly and getting into trouble with alcohol is taken as something one might expect, whereas that isn't true. That isn't true in Canada. We have a pecking order, I think, and that is that if you're male and you're drunk, you're seen as a bon vivant. You're seen as a good old guy, you know, maybe not approved of, but not criticized. If you're a woman and you're drunk, you're seen as sloppy. If you're a woman and you're a mother and you're drunk, you're seen as immoral. And if you're a woman and you're pregnant and you're drunk, you're the lowest of the low. If you're a woman and you're pregnant and you're drunk and you're poor, you're really at the bottom. So there is a pecking order, I think, in terms of public criticism.
Are you seeing leadership from women in this area in Canada? You know, in your book you talk about the Tweedy Centre, for example, and the Pathways program.
Right. We have some extraordinary leadership in terms of women understanding trauma-informed treatment and what women need in terms of treatment. They tend to be gold star, unusual programs, not across the board. Very hard to get good treatment in Canada, very hard to access it. Often, too often, who you know, where you live, whether you'll get access. So we haven't infused the treatment system in any real way in 30 years with the right kind of investment that's needed. Where we're seeing leadership is on a couple of other fronts. In the recovery movement, and I say that there are 5 of us who have started Faces and Voices of Recovery Canada. And Faces and Voices of Recovery Canada is trying to fight the stigma around addiction and say, this is what recovery looks like. This looks healthy, looks self-sustaining. It's not the revolving door where someone gets sober for 2 weeks and then falls on their knees again, but actually people having, you know, vibrant, terrific lives. We're trying to show some leadership in Canada on that front, and I think to dispel the notion that we're all hiding out in secret in church basements where people don't see the face of recovery. We really want to be open. We've had Recovery Day in 12 centres across Canada in this past September, and it's been a big success, and I think it's going to really grow. It's really been a booming movement in the United States, and it's great to see the kind of growth that we're having in Canada on that subject. So I would say that's the most vibrant. In terms of policy, we have a group. I co-founded something called National Roundtable on Girls, Women, and Alcohol, looking at the 3 big levers where you can make social change. One being marketing, one being pricing, and one being accessibility of alcohol. And we have begun to see a little bit of movement, a little receptivity to our goals. Whether we're going to see any massive change in Canada, I don't think so. I don't think in the short term.
I'll come back to that because you've raised some interesting points, and I want to talk about your international research and your perspective. But to go back to what you're talking about, the visibility of individuals in recovery like you, that's potentially controversial, isn't it? Because of the traditions of 12-step abstinence groups like Alcoholics Anonymous and the anonymity. Where do you sit on that? Because I know you've written about it and the rationale for you making your own decision to out yourself.
Right. We very much take the approach that it doesn't matter how you got into recovery, that many pathways will lead you there, and that you don't break your anonymity around your being a member of AA if you're a member of AA, or women in sobriety if you feel uncomfortable about that, but you do talk about your recovery. So I would say, my name is Ann Johnston, I'm in recovery, happy recovery, and I haven't had a drink for 5 years. That's how I would phrase it. But we are not asking people to break that tradition. I personally have strong views on the fact that if Bill Wilson were alive right now, that he might have different views on anonymity than he did then. He was a progressive guy.
Do you think he'd tweet?
I think he'd tweet. I think he'd tweet. I think he you know, he was a friend of Jung's, and Carl Jung had a big effect on him, and I think he was on the verge of all sorts of things before he died. But there are many people who know more about Bill Wilson than I do, and I just think that we are about the same place that the gay movement was back in the late 70s, early 80s, where they were hiding behind, you know, blackened windows. And I think we need to come out and own our recovery in a terrifically positive and happy and enthusiastic way.
And yet there is a body of, well, there's a body of people in recovery-based movements who would say that anonymity is freedom. It isn't about hiding. It's about giving people the freedom to recover anonymously.
Absolutely, and they are right, and it should be a personal choice. So that is why with our recovery movement, Faces and Voices of Recovery, we are not asking anyone to break any kind of personal vows, if you will, about the anonymity issue. I think it's really important, though, to talk about how difficult it is. I mean, what a barrier it is to even say you're in recovery. The question that I have been asked most often this fall is, why on earth did you want to write this book? And you know, I've come to see it as maybe one of the ruder questions that I could be asked. I say with some humor, because what the interviewers are really saying is, are you crazy? Don't you know you'll never get a job again? And how much did you drink? And I really, I mean, that's what that question
is. That what people want to know?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And my answer to that is, I'm not crazy. I think we're as sick as our secrets. I may not be hired again. I'm a writer, and I think the stigma is large. I applied for a job recently that I really cared about and didn't even get an interview, which was unusual. I think when you write a book called Drink, it's not surprising I didn't get an interview. And number 3, how much did I drink? I drank a lot more than I should have, and a lot less than a lot of people presume. Now, when I got up to 4 or 5 glasses of wine, I'll say 4, that was a lot for me. And I've had people within the recovery group that I belong to say, that's nothing, but it was a lot for me. I had a high bottom. I didn't crack up cars. I didn't, you know, lose everything as some people do. I'm fortunate, but I needed recovery. I really needed recovery. I was a blackout drinker, and I think it's really important to name what brought you in and to remember.
The word intimate is in your title.
Right.
And that strikes me as a deliberate choice.
Right.
A deliberate adjective when you're describing that relationship between women and alcohol. It's personified at the beginning of your book as a man, as a gentleman caller, and that lure is framed often in romantic terms.
Right. I'm most profoundly influenced by Caroline Knapp, the late Caroline Knapp's beautiful book, Drinking a Love Story, which is a memoir that really broke through all sorts of taboos for me in my brain, because she was, like myself, a writer, a journalist, and she wrote about a different kind of drinking than my mother's. My mother's drinking kept me in denial for a long time because I didn't drink during the day. I didn't miss work. I wasn't an alcoholic in the same way my mother was. But her book, Caroline Knapp's book, broke through, and when I went to see an addiction doctor, he said, "How do you feel about alcohol?" And I said, "I love it." And I did love it. I was addicted to it, and I was in love with it. It made me feel terrific. It made my toes curl. I loved champagne. I loved the glamour of it. I loved what was special about it. And it worked beautifully for me till it didn't. And when it didn't, it was hideous and ugly. But for a long time it worked. And I think we're denying the power of the substance not to give it its due. I mean, it is fabulous at celebrations. It is fabulous when it's not being abused. It is a fabulous part of adult life, but when it's not, it's really not. And so We do, I think, as addicts, fall in love with our substance. I think it is a romance.
And to go back to that question of marketing, I think it was Nancy Friday who talked about how the cosmetics industry didn't lose the chance to market all manner of creams and potions to women as something that will help you to cherish your skin and to love your skin. And that's a language that perhaps has been co-opted within the liquor industry also.
Oh yes, I think we, much as maybe the diamond industry made you believe that you couldn't be engaged without, De Beers diamond, the same thing has happened with, you can't be on a date without a glass of wine. You can't get married without a glass of champagne. When you speak to almost any woman who's given up drinking, they'll say, but what about my wedding and champagne? Even if they're not getting married, it's the first thing that people say. Young girls in treatment centers will say it. But what about the champagne at my wedding? We are just programmed. We're programmed to believe that, and that can make early sobriety very difficult.
Talking about romance, to move on to sex, that relationship between alcohol and between, I'd say, sexuality, but you can also talk about sexual crime. That's something that's very topical here in New Zealand at the moment. Cases of young girls who were sexually abused by young boys, having drunk too much, been drunk, having not necessarily consented to sex. In your book, you talk about an era at, I think it's Queen's College, of deep misogyny and a culture where I think there were posters hung out the window of the dorms saying things like, no means more beer.
Right. And there have been some very high-profile cases in North America, and the awful one about a young girl called Rutea Parsons who took her life last year because she had not consented to sex, or it looks like she didn't. There were lots of pictures on Facebook about an assault. It is so intertwined now, and especially I think with social media, the whole issue of how vulnerable people become. People, and I mean men and women, become when there's too much alcohol involved, and it's a complex issue. There's a lot of arguing about it right now.
And I think that you have an interaction with a behavioural sociologist in your book where you talk about changing the culture. And he said it's not necessarily about changing the culture, it's about the things we can fix, the problems we can fix.
Right.
And is that a policy issue, do you think, when it comes to sexuality, for example, young women's sexuality?
Well, we just have to be a lot more alert. I think we have been sold a bill of goods, much as the tobacco industry sold people, and then women with Virginia Slim sold women a bill of goods about cigarettes. I think we've been sold a bill of goods in terms of, this is a necessary part of romance and dating and social life and femininity, absolutely femininity, and we have to really just rethink our whole relationship with alcohol. I think we, as I said earlier, we haven't had a mature conversation, not a normal, mature conversation about what our favorite drug is, the side effects of it, what real limits are. We just don't know them. We're absolutely driving blind. It's as if we're in a car with no speedometer. And I find that remarkable in 2013.
Tell you what fascinated me, you wrote this book from the very clear perspective of somebody who's, an alcoholic recovering, and yet several of the people you talked to, they said that alcohol-related harms are happening to all sorts of women who would never consider themselves alcoholic,
right,
or even consider that their drinking is dangerous.
Right, and that's the thing that people can't grasp. And that's why we're not having the conversation. We other the rare alcoholic and say, it's not me. And if it is me drinking too much, I'm just trying to be more like the French or the Italian and imbibing in the name of sophistication. And
who we now know have huge rates of heart disease and alcoholism.
Exactly. And so we totally other them and we say, not us. And what we're failing to understand, called the French paradox, is that in Canada, for instance, more than 80% of those 15 years and over drink. it is the harms to those people, the 80%, not the little 1.5% who are dependent as I am. Those people getting into trouble, falling off ladders, getting into trouble on New Year's Eve, showing up in emergency rooms, police-related events, those people, that larger number drinking at a risky level that's causing the trouble. So, you have the United States talking about a huge binge drinking crisis epidemic with women. It isn't that they're all addicted. It is that on occasion they binge drink. The most common binge drinking habit is 6 drinks on any one occasion. It's a lot of alcohol. 6 drinks is a lot of alcohol, and people get into trouble. And it isn't just the addicted person. We live in an alcoholic culture. We are totally besotted with this substance, and a lot of people are getting into trouble more frequently than they're admitting on occasions when they are going to their book club, drinking on a Saturday night, doing what normal people do.
You've traveled, you've looked around, you're an international researcher. Who's doing it right? Are there any cultures that have got it right, that have got that relationship with alcohol right?
No one has it right. Some people have, the random breath testing and the drinking driving piece right, and good for them, because that's a big piece to get right. Some people have that right. Some people have it right in terms of taking the profits that are coming in from alcohol and funneling them through health or back into treatment. Fabulous, perfect. But no one country has it right, and that's hard to accept. So you take a look, for instance, at the United States, where taxes on alcohol haven't gone up since 1991, where often you go to buy alcohol and it's cheaper than orange juice or milk. It can be the cheapest thing, say, when you're at a gas station and purchasing it. Something's deeply wrong with that picture. So does Canada is it doing a better job? Yes, of course it is. We have liquor monopolies. They are strong. Our pricing is good, relatively speaking, on alcohol. But do we have it all right? No. In terms of drinking and driving, terrible. Compared to, say, Australia or Ireland, and people would just shake their heads. Sweden would shake their heads and say, "You're kidding." People getting behind the wheel. I mean, in Sweden, people wouldn't dream of getting behind a wheel and drinking and driving. So if you cherry pick, you could put together a terrific country. You've got South Africa looking at banning marketing. Wonderful. Wonderful.
Or the French, who insist that liquor only be advertised according to what it actually is. And I say liquor, I mean alcohol.
Right. Their loi vin is perfect. Perfect and a gold standard for what other people should be doing. So yes, if you cherry picked, you could produce a perfect country. And when I was starting on this research 4 years ago, I was desperate to find that country that was perfect. I was really keen. And I think that the most profound thing that I can say is that we would hope that women in developing countries, who are very much the focus of the alcohol monopolies, that we would hope very much that they would not follow in the footsteps of Western women and say, when you are moving into white-collar jobs and you're being lured and told that progress looks like this, drinking more, don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. Don't try and be like men. Don't follow in their footsteps on alcohol. You don't have to. That would be a victory.
Do you think as a species, as a human race, we will ever lose that desire for intoxication? It seems to be hardwired in us.
I don't think we'll ever lose it. I think it's a delicious way to experiment with being a human being. And I'm extremely, what's the word? Is it tolerant or forgiving of my own interest in pushing the edges, pushing the boundaries? And do I miss it? Yes, I miss it terribly. Not serious intoxication, but being a little tipsy, being a little fluttery, enjoying my second glass of wine. Yes, I miss it terribly. But so I can't see us ever giving it up. I don't think that's realistic.
What has replaced that for you? Are there new rituals now? Are there new ways to mark that, or to relax in some cases, I suppose?
I'm very grateful for sleep. It's one of the things that you really get back when you stop drinking. You not only get your sleep back and your dreams and your ability to read before bed, you get your ability. I wake very early. I write starting at about 2 or 3 in the morning, and I also get great awakenings, great times to be creative, and I just enjoy how much more life I have, how much more rich time and experience. I drank a lot. I gave up a lot of time to drinking, and it numbed me, and it made me sleepy, and it disturbed my sleep. And I think when you give up drinking, you don't know how much you'll get back, but you get back an awful lot. It pays off.
That experience of outing yourself as an alcoholic and as a recovering alcoholic now, obviously from reading the book one can tell that wasn't something you took lightly.
Oh no, I had to be talked into it. When I did my 14-part series in the Toronto Star on alcohol policy, I did speak to my editor about whether or not I would come out in that series. And she said, do you ever have to work again? And I said, yes. And she said, you can't. And I was so terrified for a while that I would never ever get a job again and I need to work. That it wasn't until my book agent came to me and said, I think you should really go for it. And there was immediate interest all over the world in this book. But it was a huge decision. You can't take it back, can you? No, you can't take it back. And you get called brave a lot. But as I was saying earlier, when the phone doesn't ring when you've applied for a job, I don't think you can be surprised. And so a friend said to me recently, you said there was stigma, now you're learning. And that's probably the cruel truth. I am learning that there is stigma. And I hope it disappears soon, but I'm not sure it will in my lifetime. I hope it does. I hope it does in the next 5 years. Our recovery group, I hope, will do something about it. But no, I've put myself squarely in a camp, and there's no taking it back.
You found that too with the series, didn't you? The reaction to that, the individual responses, whereas you had some people saying it's very brave of these women to share their stories, other people saying, well, why can't they exercise more self-control?
Right. Thank you for reading the whole book. It's lovely to speak to someone who's read the whole book, and that does come near the end. So it's very, very difficult. It's been hard for my mother. It's been hard for my mother, who was very brave at 84, to allow me to use her story. And I think it says a lot about the shame that we're made to feel. I have to say, maybe I'm an immoral human being. I don't feel shame for having had a drinking problem. I'm very conscious of how it happened. I don't feel shame. I feel some terrible sadness for the loss of a big love in my life that happened, but I don't feel shame. And I feel enormously proud of the women who came along on the journey with me, and I think there will be so many more. I will say I'm grateful that it didn't impede the years when my son was young at home. I think had it done so, I would feel a bit differently. He had headed off to university, thank God, when my drinking was really getting bad. But, and I'm glad that my bad years were brief. I'm fortunate that way. But we can never take it for granted. You know, so many of us find recovery and slip, and we can't take it for granted. It is a day-to-day thing, and you have to work hard for it, very hard. It's not for the faint of heart, recovery.
That story of your own alcoholism is a story of motherhood, because you are the daughter, as you say, of Maxie, your mum, and her drinking is detailed in this book, and you also detail that moment when it was a card from your son that soured your relationship with alcohol.
Yes, my son gave me an unbelievable Mother's Day card, and I was thrilled when I opened it because it was entitled Happy Mother with a big heart on it, and I hadn't read the fine print, and I thought, this is beautiful, this is a real gem. And then I read the fine print, and the fine print said, note, there are no bags under her eyes, and note, she's drinking Perrier, not wine. And I realized with just a shudder that this was actually, he was blowing the whistle on me, blowing the whistle on the fact that I drank too much. I never had another drink after that I enjoyed. Not really. I couldn't drink innocently after that. I continued to drink. I continued to battle whether I needed to quit, because denial is an enormous thing in addiction. But I never really enjoyed it again. It took me 3 more years, I'm sad to say, to give up alcohol, but that card was my wake-up call, and it was a real slap in the face.
He said, got it?
I have it out for all to see in my kitchen. I'm now proud of it. But it took me a long time to be proud of it. And yeah, it's out on display in my kitchen. I think I'm going to have it framed. It's probably the most important thing that anybody ever gave to me. And bless him. Bless him. And the one thing that I inherited from being a child of an alcoholic was I did make a promise that if someone called me on my drinking, I wouldn't deny it. And so the one thing I feel proud of is when he said, you drink too much. I didn't say no. I said, yes, you're right. And so we had an open dialogue, because when I grew up, we weren't allowed to say it. We were never allowed to mention the elephant in the living room. So I'm proud of that, and we celebrate together, my son and myself, and we have a fabulous relationship. We just drove across North America in his pickup truck, which was a blast. And that's something I wouldn't have been invited to do had I still been drinking. Not in the least. We wouldn't even be speaking.
And he reminded you of that, didn't he?
Yes.
And perhaps he'd forgotten, but he told you that in a phone call.
Yes, he said, you have lost a big love, Mum, but you gained me back, and you're a fabulous mother. And I said, I don't think I lost you. And he said, oh yes, Mum. For 4 months we didn't even talk. It was really strained. And I think that says so much about the denial of alcoholism. It's progressive, and it's marked by denial. And that's how, even today, I can fool myself on a good day and say, I'd love a glass of wine. I haven't had a glass of wine for 5 years. Of course I could do it. And it's just addiction speaking in my ear. I think of it as a snake on one side and a bird on the other, and I have to take the snake and ask it to retreat. It's a decent opponent to addiction, a worthy opponent. You have to be really aware and alert. It will fool you. And I do know people who have gone out after 25 years and lost everything. So it can happen. You're one of the fortunate ones that gets to stay on the side of sobriety. And I think that it can outfox you very easily.
And finally, Anne, what was it you wanted to see here? Was there anything in particular that you were looking for in the New Zealand context?
I was so interested in the fact that there was an open conversation. I was looking for a country, when I was doing my travels a few years ago, I had very much wanted to come here and hadn't been able to afford to. And I was interested in looking at a society where the conversation was more open. In Canada, it is not open on alcohol.
When you say it's not open, do you mean there's not journalism of the sort that you write, or there's not a dialogue in terms of lobbying or policy papers?
There is great policy. Are great researchers, but the gap between what we know, what those researchers produce, people like Jürgen Rehm and Tim Stockwell, known all over the world, and what we do as a culture in terms of our government, listening to them, focusing on them, there's just an enormous gap. And what I find interesting in New Zealand is, while I've been here, there's been a policy paper released on women and alcohol. Fascinating that that's even out in the open, being publicized.
Even though the results are that we're drinking more than ever before,
right,
and we're more affected by the drinking of others.
Right, but terrific. You're looking at harm to others, which is a big part of the dialogue. You're looking at how you behave with alcohol, and that was well publicized, and good for you. Good for you as a country. I think fabulous. It's the beginning. The beginning is to say, A, we have a problem. B, what are you going to do about it? It's the second thing. But to even just say, when I first got my fellowship to talk about women in alcohol in 2010, it was announced at a major gala event where the best journalists in the country were there, and my name was announced and people were all clapping, and then it was announced what I was going to discuss, women in alcohol, what I was going to investigate, and everyone started tittering. It was a below the radar issue at that point. Now people are starting to accept maybe women are drinking more. Back then in 2010, people were shaking their heads. They were saying, maybe in the UK, but not here. So I think it's been a matter of opening people's minds, opening people's thinking, connecting the dots on the marketing piece that we are seeing a pinging of the market. And it's important that we talk about it.
As we are.
As we are.
It's been a pleasure, Anne.
Thank you so much.